Good morning, good afternoon. This is Sarah Plush from TransCelerate. Welcome everyone who's joined today's educational webinar focused on the Site Qualification and Training Initiative. I'm going to just get us started this morning by introducing a few of our speakers, but first I wanted to introduce some TransCelerate team members who've helped make this webinar possible. So you've already heard from myself, Sarah Plush, here to really help create some content for everyone that we hope you find valuable. Raquel Ricadio is joined on the line as well. She'll be covering the TransCelerate introduction today, and she'll also be will be providing some support for our Q&A session. So as questions come in, she'll certainly do her best to tee those up to our panelists. And then Jennifer Sun is helping with the logistics of today's webinar. If during today's webinar you happen to have any feedback or want to report a technical issue, you can do that through emailing the events mailbox at TransCelerate. This event is being recorded just for everyone's knowledge, so our intent is to make this available along with the slides themselves. Great, so without further ado, I'd love to introduce our presenters today. I'll start with Sherry Jacobson. Sherry is a Director of Development Training at AbbVie. She's had over 20 years of experience in the pharmaceutical research industry, having held multiple roles with increasing responsibility across the industry, including investigative site, clinical research organizations, biopharmaceutical sponsors. Sherry's also led a global team for development, implementation, and tracking of compliance training in support of AbbVie's Global Pharmaceutical Development Organization. So she certainly brings a wealth of experience, and we're very excited to have her join us today. I'd also like to introduce Teresa Stewart. Teresa has more than 20-year history working on quality and is the Director and Regional Operations Manager at Allergan, where she is responsible for overseeing the monitoring of investigator studies in the U.S. and Canada. She's also been a member of the Site Qualification and Training team since December of 2013. And she was responsible for leading the development of the informational programs for less experienced site staff. So excited to welcome Teresa with us today. And our final expert that's joined us today is Yvonne McCracken. Yvonne has been with Meridian Clinical Research as a VP of Quality Assurance since December of 2015. She was the founder of the Carolinas Research Associates and served as the Chief Executive Officer from April 1996 through June 2013, at which time the company was sold to PMG Research. She was a member and faculty of the Clinical Research Conference in Taipei, Taiwan, sponsored by ACRP and OHRP. She's been a member of DIA, GCP, and QA community since 2004 and was elected as co-chair in 2014 of the GCP QA Core Committee. Yvonne has served as trustees of the North American Council for Associates for Clinical Research Professionals and the editorial advisory board for the ACRP journal, The Monitor. So as you can hear from these introductions, we are joined by three panelists who are truly experts in their own right, but certainly have had some experience with TransCelerate and the solutions that we're going to talk about today. So I'm really excited to go ahead and run through this agenda with you. We have over 600 people from across the world, truly different backgrounds, that are joining today to learn about the content that's planned to be discussed. So certainly, just to make it a successful webinar, I'll go through a couple logistics with everyone, and then I'll hand it over to Raquel to talk through a little bit about TransCelerate. And then we'll have our experts share more around the site qualification and training at a high level, and then we'll dig a bit deeper into the core solutions that comprise that, which are the GCP mutual recognition programs, the forms, and the investigational programs. And then we will reserve some time at the end for a discussion panel. Okay, next slide, please. So we have muted all the phone lines just to ensure that everyone can hear clearly today. I just want to be sure that that is truly the case and that folks can hear clearly. So if you don't mind, underneath the attendee panel, if you could just click on the hand icon next to your name, that'll just tell me that folks on the line are able to hear us and see the slides and that we aren't having any kind of technical issues. Fantastic. I see folks are raising their hands. If you do have a question during the webinar, like I mentioned, we will have time at the end. But certainly you can submit those questions throughout as you think of them. And there's a question box to the right-hand side of your GoToWebinar panel. Just type in that question inside the box and hit submit. And then that way Raquel can have a look at that question as it comes across. And we'll do our best to tee that up during the discussion panel. Next slide. We'll also be having some live polling during today's session, completely voluntary. It's also anonymous. It's really just a chance for us to better understand the demographics on the call. So we'll queue that up when we get to one of those questions for you. And last but not least, I did just want to touch on some ground rules. So we certainly want to make sure that this is a valuable presentation, but then also the question and answer session, we really want to make sure that we talk about, you know, what's really the most burning questions in everyone's mind. But we do need to just follow a few really simple ground rules. In that, you know, the participation in today's webinar and using the actual tools and assets that TransCelerate's created, it's truly voluntary. And you certainly don't have to identify who you are when you ask the question. There are a few things that we can't discuss as part of our Q&A today. So anything related to specific vendors, specific sites, specific companies, you know, if you're having any type of issues, long-term development plans, anything related to cost, we really can't discuss. And then anything else related to implementation experience, certainly our presenters will be happy to share a little bit about their experience today using these solutions. All right, and I'll hand it over to Raquel Mercadio to go through a little bit about TransCelerate and SQT's impact.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm Raquel Mercadio, Senior Project Manager for Mature Initiatives across TransCelerate's portfolio. And as Sarah said, before we dive into the meat of the initiative's work, we'd like to give you a brief introduction to TransCelerate and the value and impact the initiative has already had on the industry. So just starting here, as you see on the slide, this is just a general overall slide to let you know that TransCelerate is a nonprofit entity whose main purpose is to improve the health of people around the world by fostering collaboration in research and development. Next slide. So you can see here from this slide, just a little bit of brief history on TransCelerate. It was founded in 2012 with 10 member companies and 5 initial projects. And just 5 years later, BioCelerate was founded, which focuses on the preclinical research space. And fast forward to today, our membership is 19 companies strong with over 25 initiatives spanning wide breadth and depth, continuing our culture of collaboration and enabling platform trials. We have also launched DataCelerate, a platform focused on enabling sharing of clinical and preclinical data sharing. And we're really excited about all the things that we have going on in the current space. Now, the reach of our global membership continues to expand as there's over 1,000 people from TransCelerate member companies who are experts from all facets of the industry who contribute to the design and development of TransCelerate solutions. And TransCelerate always strives to maintain a global lens on its efforts. And you'll see that we have a country network of 22 countries and consistent engagement with 13 global regulatory authorities, ensuring our solutions are valuable and relevant to entities worldwide. Similarly, in addition to collaboration with health authorities, TransCelerate understands that consistent collaboration with key stakeholders across the R&D ecosystem is really a necessity to ensure our work is valuable, current, and non-duplicative, as well as impactful, from investigator sites to the research and CRO community, as well as patient advocacy groups and other associations and consortia. So you'll see this isn't an exhaustive list of our collaborations, but it's meant to give you a good idea of our external collaboration efforts as we continue our work. Now, TransCelerate's initiatives, including the 6 brand new ones we've launched in 2018 that you can see in bold, all fall into 3 strategic areas. The first is harmonizing processes and sharing information. Second, improving the patient and site experience. And third, enhancing sponsor efficiencies and drug safety. And overall, the mission of all the initiatives is to collaborate on driving efficiency, effectiveness, and quality on the delivery of new medicines. Now, when we're talking about the Site Qualification and Training Initiative, also known as SQT in particular, we've also seen that we've realized significant value and impact for this initiative already across the industry. Our experts have presented and served on panels at multiple global conferences. And to further illustrate the industry's interest in the work, just within the past year, the materials that are publicly available on TransCelerate's website have been accessed over 4,000 times, and the page itself has been consulted nearly 10,000 times. So it really shows the interest that the industry has in what we're doing here at TransCelerate. And to further illustrate that, we also have this slide that just shows you just a few pieces of direct feedback we've received from our members. So if you take just a few moments to view the slide, you'll see that in particular, the SQT solutions have impact on reduced cost, reduced tasks for sites, and improved relationships with sites as well, which are particularly important. On the next slide, you'll actually see some quotes directly from our investigator sites, talking about really the SQT initiatives and how they've helped to reduce duplication in training and reduce time spent training. And really, TransCelerate aims to reduce the administrative burden for sites with this initiative. And we do want to invite you, if you have had some experience as well with your own work and within your own organizations with the SQT tools and resources, to share those with us. So we have an email address here, events@transceleratebiopharmainc.com, that you can use to send us any of your feedback on our SQT initiatives and tools and resources as well. And with that, I'm actually going to transfer now over to Teresa Stewart, who's really going to get into the details about the SQT initiative and the tools and resources that we have for you.
Hi, Raquel. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much. The first question that we have is an audience poll question. And if everyone would take a moment and review the question just to let us know which SQT solutions that you have heard about. All right, shall we go to the next slide? Great, thank you very much. So here's our responses. So not surprisingly, a lot of people have heard about the GCP training mutual recognition. Sherry is going to speak about that initiative a little bit later in our presentation. We've heard a little bit about the site forums, and I'm grateful that we're having our discussion today so that we can explain a little bit more about our initiative. All right, so first of all, I'm very pleased to have the opportunity today to speak with you about the Site Qualification and Training Initiative. Those of us who have had the privilege of serving in this group have really enjoyed our experience, and we hope that we have provided solutions that are helpful to everyone who is on this call. So just a quick bit of information that the SQT initiative was actually one of the very first initiatives that was developed or initiated at TransCelerate. We started in 2012, and we were actively working on our solutions until very recently. The work stream is in maintenance phase. However, we're not working on new solutions. But one of the most important, I think, considerations for us within this group was that we understood the challenges and the difficulties that investigator sites experience when conducting a clinical trial with multiple sponsors. We were in a situation where we had very similar requests, but we also had some very different requests. We had lots of different forms, we had lots of different training, and obviously, GCP training was also a significant pain point. So the purpose of our team, if we can go to the next slide, thank you very much, was with really working on a site focus where we could harmonize our processes and share information and really try and make every effort to reduce that administrative burden on the investigator sites. One of the things that we really were hoping to achieve was that by coming to some common solution for many of our initiatives, that we could make it more consistent for the investigator site, which would then result in improved quality. So as you can see, our initial vision was really to reduce the administrative burden, to provide more information about the practical aspects of conducting a clinical trial, and also to develop stronger partnerships with our investigator sites. In our approach to our solutions, we requested help and assistance from external stakeholders, including SCRS, investigator sites, and as well as the member companies. We really were looking for the development of processes around mutual recognition of training. We were hoping that we could develop some common forms that were not protocol specific, and implement and utilize those templates in the conduct of our trials across member companies. And of course, we'll talk a little bit later about the informational programs, which I personally am very excited about the fact that we've been able to develop and release those. So our output in terms of our four most popular items were our GCP Training Mutual Recognition Program. That was our first output, and by far the one that has been adopted most rapidly. We have also developed 8 common site forms. We'll review those later in these presentations. We have 12 informational programs, and our final initiative that we released was the EDC System Training Mutual Recognition Program. Next slide. I think that this is a really interesting slide because it shows at a glance the adoption of the initiatives amongst the member companies for the site qualification and training solutions. As we mentioned at the start of this presentation, it's voluntary implementation for each of these programs amongst the member companies. But what's also really interesting to see is the popularity of our GCP Mutual Recognition Program, which has been widely adopted amongst the member companies at TransCelerate. The other solutions, including forms, informational programs, and EDC mutual recognition, were implemented later. In some instances, some of these items are more common forms that are optional or voluntary in terms of their implementation. But this also shows a little bit about the adoption. So I think that this is a helpful slide, again, because it does really come across and show us how important our first initiative, which was the GCP Mutual Recognition Program, and how popular that is. And Sherry, I believe that I'm going to turn this over to you, and you're going to talk to us about our most popular programs.
Yes, thank you, Teresa. If you want to go ahead and move to the next slide. And so, as Teresa alluded to, the GCP Training Mutual Recognition really stemmed off the idea of trying to eliminate redundancies in what we were doing as member companies. We realized that as sponsor companies, we were each requiring sites to take our own GCP training. And not only did sites take that training for our studies, but for every study of every member company. And then also some institutions would require training, or sites would go and get training from outside providers. So I'll start with what we didn't do. We didn't develop another GCP training because, again, there's plenty of GCP training available. So we weren't going to go down the road of creating a course. But what we did do is create minimum criteria based on the ICH GCP guidelines that we could attest to, such that we could be comfortable that all of the training that we now have on the TransCelerate site would meet that minimum criteria and cover the basics of ICH GCP. Once we established those minimum criteria, we developed a process for the sponsors to mutually accept the GCP training, and then subsequently a process for training providers, so not necessarily sponsor companies, but any training provider could self-attest that their training met the minimum criteria. And so the output of that is the list that is on the TransCelerate website that lists all of the both sponsor companies and other training providers GCP training that have attested to meeting the minimum criteria. And with the idea that if a sponsor company goes to a site or a CRO goes to a site and they have evidence that this training has been completed and the training meets that minimum criteria by being on the list, that we can accept that training for that specific study and not require redundant training. Another criteria that was put into place was that we would agree that GCP training would be good for 3 years from the start of the study. So if a sponsor goes or a CRO goes to a site and they see that the training has been completed within the past 3 years, then they wouldn't require them to repeat it until they met that 3-year time frame. The benefits, obviously, were to some significant time savings as we were eliminating that redundant GCP training, as well as ease for participation. Any training provider, whether they be a sponsor or other provider, can go to the site and attest to that their training meets the minimum criteria. Okay, we can go to the next slide, thanks. So currently, we have over 300 training providers represented on the TransCelerate website that have attested to their GCP training meeting the minimum criteria, with over 800 GCP training courses, representing over 30 countries. So again, truly a global impact. Obviously, this improves the relationship between sites and sponsors because we are not asking sites to, or sponsors are not asking sites to do things that they are already doing, and they can focus their time then on protocol specifics. Recently, with the second release of ICH GCP E6, we have the minimum criteria have been updated to include the parameters that were added in the addendum, and then training providers can now attest to their training meeting the criteria or the updated criteria. Next slide, please. So if you are a training provider, how do you go to the, how do I get my training on the list? First, you would go to the TransCelerate website, which is listed on the slide. You'll see on that website that there is GCP Mutual Recognition up on the right, and you would select that. You would review the expectations and the minimum criteria. And then if your course meets that criteria, you would select the add the course detail and follow the prompts to complete the self-attestation form. One of the criteria for getting a training on the list is that a PDF sample of the training completion certificate would need to be uploaded. And there's instructions on how to ensure that that sample meets the specifics for uploading. And the reason for that is that that allows when a CRA is at a site and wants to ensure that the criteria or the training course meets it has been added to the list, they would compare the certificate that the site has to the sample certificate that's posted on the site. And then once the training has been reviewed by TransCelerate, the course details appear on the website under the Training Providers tab that you can see on the slide here. And again, as training providers, once they update their training, they are also required to go back to that site to update the training. So on the flip side of that, if you are a CRA and you're at a site and you're presented with a training certificate and you want to verify that the course has met the minimum criteria, then you would view the certificate that the site has given you. You would go to the TransCelerate website, go to the list of training providers, and click on the sample of certificate for that course to ensure that they are that they match. And again, this is just really the process for checking. You go to the site, you click again on the GCP Mutual Recognition tab, you select training providers, and you look for the name of the training provider. In this example, it's Academic Advance. And then you would click to view sample where the certificate is and compare that certificate to what the site has. Now we'll move on to one of the other initiatives within the site qualification and training work stream, and that is the mutual recognition and standardized forms for investigator sites. So once again, as member companies of TransCelerate, we looked and recognized that we were asking for a lot of information from sites that was common amongst all member companies. Some things are just common requirements or common information that are needed to conduct a clinical trial. And so we pulled together all the forms and templates and best practices from each of the member companies and developed standardized forms that can be freely used by the public because they're posted on the TransCelerate site. In addition, with the implementation of the Shared Investigator Platform, these forms align with that such that you can either upload the form or have the form completed within the platform itself. Once again, this provided a consistent terminology across all the member companies so that sites aren't referring to different things that are just different names for the same information. It's easier for sites to follow that consistent terminology and approach. It reduces the collection of duplicate information across studies, and as a result, saves time for both sites and for sponsors. And as I mentioned, the content has been automated via the Shared Investigator Platform. So the forms on this slide are what are available to be downloaded online: a financial disclosure form, the CV template, facility profile form, site signature and delegation of responsibilities log, both a protocol level and site-specific informed consent tracking log, and then guidances for both the FDA 1571 and 1572. Some of the forms have been translated into Japanese, and you'll be able to view those on the site as well. So when you go to the website, you can either download the form and complete it on paper, and then if you are on the Shared Investigator Platform, you can upload that document to the platform and have it available there. Or if you are creating your profile within the Shared Investigator Platform, you would simply go there, complete the online form, or not the online form, you would complete the fields that are required for establishing your profile within the Shared Investigator Platform. And then from that information, you would be able to produce your CV. So you can preview it online and then generate it for any sponsor moving forward. You can also download it as a PDF to have for your files. And again, listed on the bottom are the basics for that CV. For the facility profile form, very similar. You can either complete the form outside of the system and upload it, or you can generate the form from the information that has been completed within the Shared Investigator Platform. So once an investigator receives and accepts an invitation to participate in this study, you will be able to associate different facilities or IRBs according to that study, so that that information for any of the facilities that you're using for that study is available to that sponsor based on what you've associated within the platform. And then you can also assign study staff based on the information that you already have in the profile for any specific study. And with that, I will turn it back over to Teresa to talk a little bit more about the informational programs.
Thank you, Sherry. Hi, everybody. I'm back. I'd like to talk a little bit about the informational programs. So a little bit of background on these informational programs. You know, one of the reasons why we chose this as an initiative to work on within the SQT team was because we often fielded a lot of questions from our site staff, both who had been working on clinical trials for quite a period of time and those who were less experienced or new to clinical research, asking us, you know, where can we get more practical hands-on information when it comes to conducting a clinical trial? So therefore, we put together a series of informational programs. Our first program is the PI oversight topic. And what we did with this particular topic is we collaborated with the Society of Clinical Research Sites to create a video-based informational program which outlines basic components related to the investigator oversight of clinical trials. This particular topic contains examples of tools that may help to provide some practical applications with regards to investigator oversight. This topic may be used by investigators who have less experience in conducting clinical trials, or investigators for which oversight has been identified as an opportunity for additional knowledge and information. It may also be used in preparation for a known inspection or upcoming audit. The purpose of these informational programs was to enhance patient safety and the quality of clinical trial oversight, and also to result in more efficient and effective startup and conduct of the study. If we can go to the next slide. Great, thank you very much. The investigator oversight topic was actually our first informational topic. It resulted in the development and release of additional informational programs, and the topics are listed here. Each topic runs between 20 to 40 minutes. It's based on readily available information on the key concepts of clinical research. It does not replace GCP training, but we're hopeful what it does is provide some additional information to support the knowledge and understanding of the GCP requirements and regulations. For your information, the topics that we have currently available were developed and based on the ICH E6 Release 1. They are in the process of being updated to include the additions that were part of the R2 update that occurred last year. I also wanted to mention that we're very excited that these topics are both available in English as well as Mandarin, and both sets of informational programs will be updated and replaced. Thank you very much. So that's it for the information sharing that we had planned as part of the overview of the initiatives. And now we're going to go on to discussion portion of our meeting.
Great, thank you, Sherry. This is a portion of our presentation that we like to really talk about the experiences that our experts have had with SQT and some of their background in working with those tools. We did have some pre-submitted questions from some of our registrants prior to the webinar, and if you flip to the next slide, we can take a view of those. The first one really is about the site level information, and we're happy to have a great site representative with us today, Yvonne McCracken, to talk about how SQT tools are implemented at the site level.
Well, we have taken the tools, especially the modules, the training modules, and really have started using them and integrated them into our formal training program. We started out a couple years ago by just having new people come in and take a look at all the modules. They were very helpful. I've gone through them and just find them extremely helpful to anybody, especially if you don't know about research. Then as we kind of moved forward, we thought, well, these are really good for people who have experience in research to refresh what they know, to kind of reintegrate them into some of the areas that are on the modules. And so then we implemented last year, I think it was at the end of 2016, we implemented for all of our staff, whether they're experienced or new, to go through the modules and to have finished them by December. And then we also took the investigator oversight module and had all of our investigators review that, just because we all know the difficulty it is for documentation of oversight and what is actually required of oversight, and the understanding of our investigators of what is required of them. So we have now hired a consultant to help us put in place a formal training program that's going to be starting probably the next month or two. And in that, we have required all those modules to be reviewed by the staff. One other thing I have found to be extremely helpful is when we see we're having problems at a site or with a particular coordinator, we can have them re-review those modules, especially something like SAEs and some of those source documentation that really does help them remember what it is they're supposed to be doing and why they're supposed to be doing it. So we have just found those tools to be extremely helpful, and they're at no charge. I mean, we could probably find other tools on the web, and we have looked at them, that are very good, but these are just so professionally done and have so much information at no charge to our site. And so we really have, implemented them, and I tell other sites that those are something they should go to and use on a regular basis. We are going to be looking at some of the forms. We have not implemented using the forms, but that is our next step, is to look at the forms and see which ones we can implement so we're consistent across all of our sites. I think we have something like 16 sites now that getting consistency is sometimes difficult, but using these forms I think is going to help us get there.
Thank you, Yvonne. That was really helpful to provide the site perspective. At this point, I do want to make sure that everyone knows that they can submit questions live via the question box on your screen to the panel to go ahead and answer those for you. In the meantime, we did want to also have Sherry and Teresa possibly provide some feedback on your experiences implementing SQT at the sponsor level, whether there's some challenges or maybe some tips for other sponsors that you might be able to provide the audience.
Sure. This is Sherry. I guess, and I think this reflects somewhat of what we saw on that one slide with the adoption levels, because it's not, or at least what our experience was, is that it wasn't as easy as just flipping a switch and adopting things. A lot of the internal SOPs had to be updated or modified to reflect use of some of the standard, especially the standard forms. I think, and as well as the process around usually recognizing GCP training. So it does take a little bit of time, and you do have to think through, the impact on other parts of the organization, and how do you put this process into place such that you can mutually recognize either the GCP training or accept the forms. So again, I guess giving yourself some time to work through some of those process changes, and then the other piece is really communication, making sure that because the monitors are the ones that are typically dealing with any of the questions that the sites may have, they're the ones that really need to be aware of what that process is and how you're implementing it. I think those are probably the two biggest pieces from the GCP training and the forms perspective. And again, I think communication is a thread throughout all of the initiatives, that ensuring that the organization remains aware that especially with the informational programs, that they're available for sites to use and to encourage their use.
Thanks, Sherry. This is Teresa. So I'll just add to your comments. I agree that when it comes to implementation and adoption within the organization, I think that it's helpful to ensure that you include all of your key stakeholders in your discussions around the implementation of the solutions, so that you have a clear understanding of the impact that introducing these new processes may have to your current systems and procedures. And it does take time. And it does require the input of a number of staff within the organization. I will say, personally speaking, for the GCP mutual recognition, it was the feedback and the support of our investigator sites and their staff that helped us to implement the solution in a more expedient way. The forms we have, we're looking at those not only holistically, but also individually. And as an organization, sometimes what you'll do is you're evaluating these processes. You will take an approach where there may be something that is more critical in terms of implementing, and other items which you may choose to continue to use as optional. And that's quite applicable for us when it comes to the things such as the CV template and the site facility form.
Thanks, Sherry. We actually just had a question come in regarding forms, and it was a general question about describing the process of collaboration from sponsors for the common forms. For example, as you develop the forms, how were the sponsors included in this development? So just to give some sort of background on how the development happened with the different sponsors that worked on the forms together.
This is Sherry. I'll have to say it was a challenge, right? Because there are some very, for each member company, there were some very valid reasons why they had a form a specific way, or why certain pieces were included in a form. And so bringing, all of those pieces together and trying to create something that would be acceptable to all the companies, and capture all that information without it being too onerous on the sites. And so, but we did. Part of the process was gathering the forms that each of the sponsors used, and in looking at them and understanding and meeting about why certain pieces of information were included in the forms. To come up with kind of like the best practices document or the final form or template that became available. And then in turn, ensuring that the team was communicating with the Shared Investigator Platform workstream so that those fields could then be translated into the profile that was being established via SIP.
And Sherry, it's Teresa. I'll add to that when it comes to forms. All of this is constantly evolving. It's not a static process. We do collect feedback on our forms during the course of the year, and we do conduct periodic reviews to make sure that our forms are the most current, are the most up-to-date, and are of the best quality for supporting all of the member companies and the sites in the event of future audit or inspection by health authorities.
This is Sarah Flesh from TransCelerate. I just wanted to jump in really quickly because I have gotten some questions through the virtual platform of folks wanting to know about the usage of the resources that we're talking about. And I just wanted to mention, I think we hit on this earlier, all of the resources that our experts are talking about right now, they're all free and available online. You do not have to be a member of any certain organization to access these tools. The TransCelerate website will certainly list all of the tools, but some of them are housed on the SCRS website. So just wanted to make sure that folks understood that these are free and they're available publicly. Raquel, has there been any more questions coming in online that we wanted to talk through? I see there's a lot of stuff.
There has been a rush of them all of a sudden, so I'm reading them. So thank you everyone for submitting some.
Another common question. Oh, go ahead, Raquel.
Sorry, there have been a few questions about this program and SIP, which is a little bit separate, but obviously related. So there have been a few questions about uploading certificates and CVs to SIP, and I'm hoping that one of our panelists, or perhaps Sarah, you can maybe speak to that just a bit.
Sure. So the forms that are currently available on the TransCelerate site have been recently modified to ensure that they align with the fields that are in the Shared Investigator Platform. So you can, and specifically for the facility profile form and the CV template, you can upload those into SIP, or if you are entering your profile into SIP, it's probably easier to just complete your profile within SIP and then you can generate those forms based on the information that's entered into SIP. Again, the CV just pulls the information that has been entered from the profile with regards to background and experience. The facility profile requires a couple of extra steps, because what it will do is, depending on the study that you are being invited to or being considered for, you can associate that profile with certain other, like your IRB that you would use for that study, or the staff that you are going to have working on that study. So it kind of customizes it for a specific study. And I'm not sure if that answers the questions, or.
I think so. I think people are just asking sort of about the collaboration and the linkages that currently exist between some of the forms that we have in SQT and SIP. There's quite a lot of interest, obviously, from sites regarding SIP and how this connects. So I believe that answers it.
And Raquel, this is Sarah. I can chime in too to provide some additional insight if that's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So I noticed that one of the more recently submitted questions was asking in particular about the GCP Mutual Recognition Program and its linkages into the Shared Investigator platform. When a training provider does a test to meeting the minimum criteria, there's certainly a bit of a check we do on the back end, but once we've confirmed that they followed the instructions of that self-attestation process, that course detail is published then to that list that we shared with you earlier. We also, in parallel, provide that same set of course detail data along with that sample certificate over to the Shared Investigator platform, so that they have that record can stay updated in their system as well. So that's just another example of a way that there's some linkage into the Shared Investigator platform, so that any course that's been attested through our process, we make sure that's reflected in the Shared Investigator platform as well. I thought there was a specific question about that, so I just wanted to hit that one as well.
Thanks, Sarah. This is not necessarily related to SIP, but is related to site staff CV collection. And maybe this is a question for all three of you about just your experiences within your organizations regarding minimum documentation expectations for CV collection. The example of this person gives is that they'd worked recently with a sponsor that interprets due diligence to include CVs available for review for all staff on the DOA log. And that's just a question from someone from the audience asking about sort of your experience regarding minimum documentation for CV collection, which is related to the forms that we have with SQT.
This is Sherry. I can take a stab at that.
Sure.
So with regards to the CV, the minimum requirement from a regulatory perspective is that a sponsor is ensuring that the principal investigator has the experience and qualifications to conduct the study. So at a very minimum, a sponsor would have to verify or collect the CV of the principal investigator. However, the other piece of that, though, is that ensuring, and again, reflected in the regulations, ensuring that the investigator is ensuring that the staff participating in the study are appropriately trained and qualified, right? So those CVs of those staff members need to be available as part of the requirements. It is somewhat sponsor specific as to what they collect overall for the TMF, right, or what they expect to see in the investigator file. But it is a requirement that any staff participating in the trial would be qualified and have the experience to perform whatever role they're performing, and so you would need to have documentation of that.
And this is Yvonne. The other thing that the CV helps with is to back up the people who are on the delegation log that they indeed do have that qualification and training, and that we're not having to document every single time on a training log that they've gotten, they know how to do an informed consent or source documentation or whatever that they've been delegated. That's already on their CV. So to your point, that CV has to show what their qualification and training is to be a member of the research staff.
Thanks, Yvonne. We did have a question that just came in regarding some of the countries with experience in clinical trials and some of the first slides not highlighted, and if there is intention to add them in the future. I just wanted to clarify that those were countries where there is a TransCelerate country network, and it wouldn't necessarily show exactly which countries are also participating and using some of TransCelerate solutions, but where we do have networks, and that network continues to expand depending on the interest in working with TransCelerate. So hopefully that answers your question from the audience.
And Raquel, that's a great topic. I'm wondering if any of our panelists have any experiences to share as it relates to any of the SQT solutions and how they've seen that implementation from a global perspective, any nuances. I know just for the mutual GCP program, when you look through the training providers, there's certainly a lot of global diversity in who participates in that program. So certainly I know that the word's making it around the globe, but curious from our presenters' perspective if they have any stories to share.
This is Sherry. I think with regards to the GCP mutual recognition, you know, with the representation of training providers on the site today, it certainly is a lot smoother, right? I think, you know, and I think in general that it was an easier initiative to go global with, because most countries that you're working in recognize ICH GCP as the standard, and so the fact that we are basing this on the minimum criteria that is based in ICH GCP helps in that space. I think with the forms, it's well, I'll go back to GCP training for a little bit. There are some countries that we found that have that will require a country-specific GCP training for all their investigators within that country. So we have encountered that from time to time, but those really are kind of the exceptions. The forms, I think, are dependent, I think sometimes, so again, like we've seen the Japanese translation of some of the forms, because I think that helps the sites when they can see that in their own language. So I think that might be some of the struggles is the language barriers with the forms. But that's been my experience. You know, we've been able to communicate among our affiliates as far as adoption of you know, what we put forth and have had a relatively seamless adoption.
And this is Teresa. I'll speak to the informational programs, if I may, for just a moment. So I think that one of the things we were very aware of when we developed the informational programs was that when it came to the language, that we initially made the decision that we would develop them in English. We've had such a positive response to the information within these programs. We've now actually been able to move forward with a translation into Mandarin, and those are publicly available and free of charge for anyone to access at any time. We would love to do additional languages. Having said that, however, it's very operationally challenging from the TransCelerate perspective to introduce a number of translations, and not the least of which is the logistics that recently were introduced when we have to introduce the modifications based on the R2 update that occurred in the last year. So thank you everybody for your patience. We've made every effort to have the information be basic ICH GCP to speak specifically to the global requirements without getting into the country-specific requirements of these programs. And as Sherry mentioned, there may be some important country-specific considerations within the information that we're being shared, which we have not incorporated, and people should be aware of that and respond accordingly.
Thanks, Teresa. Just reviewing some of our last few questions here. Don't think we've had any more additional ones come in. We do have about 5 minutes left, so we did want to flip to the next final polling questions to the audience, just because we want to make sure we're continually getting feedback from you regarding the usefulness of the webinars, as we do have several educational learning series webinars coming up over the course of the year. So we'd love if you would join our last poll to provide some insight into how much value this particular webinar provided for you. Just give you just a few seconds to answer. Thanks very much. All right, if we could see the results, that would be great. Good, it looks like the majority of you got some value out of this webinar, which is excellent. We're definitely looking at this feedback to be able to provide you with more webinars in the future that will fit your work and help you provide some more value to your organizations. In our next slide, I think we just have some additional information regarding how you get in touch with TransCelerate and the things that you can go to in order to follow us and all the activities that we have going on. I did want to thank our presenters and panelists, Teresa, Sherry, and Yvonne, for joining us today and for providing their expertise on the work stream and in this presentation webinar today for our audience. Again, if you want more information on TransCelerate, please go to our website. You can see a little bit more about us and also give us some feedback on the things that you've learned about today and anything else that we have provided to the industry. Again, we do thank our presenters and panelists, and especially to our audience for joining us today. Thanks very much, and hope to see you soon.